Chapter 8 is dealing with web server hardware and software. And I have to admit, this is probably not the most exciting chapter in the textbook. But there's a few basic concepts that we should make sure that we all understand. The first one is that there can be multiple meanings of the term server. Basically, a server is any computer that provides files or programs to other computers connected to it via some sort of network. Some servers are connected directly to the internet, others go through a router, but they're all running web server software that is unique to the task, designed specifically for it. And if you have an email server, it's designed specifically to take that incoming and outgoing email traffic. When you are talking about a database, again, the server is running unique software to manage those database requests coming through. And so it's uniquely designed for that. And there again, transaction server software has a different type of interface that's running that. And so the server describes several different types of computer hardware and software combinations, and without more context, you can't tell what exactly the server hardware and software configuration needs to be unless you know the task that's going to be performed. So the author has just a simple diagram showing that you've got a web client computer over here, makes the request, goes out over the internet through using TCP/IP protocol, gets to the web server processes it, sends information back, pretty straightforward. Now sometimes the web server itself needs to get information from somewhere else. In this case, a catalog database server or a order fulfillment system that's over here, and so it may do some additional requests before responding back to the original web client that initiated the process. So the operating system tasks for a web server, they include, running the computer, allocating resources, and you do have, with larger systems, responsibilities that keep track of multiple users, making sure there's no interference, and making sure that you don't have someone updating a file at the same time another is requesting it. So it's really the easy way to think of it. It's a traffic control device. You can have a web server that's running on Microsoft Windows. It's a special version of Windows. It's a server. What you see a lot of are Linux or Unix-based systems. The Linux and Unix are very similar in their languages and how they work. You'll find some people that say Microsoft's system is simpler to use than the Unix. However, we all know of all the issues around Microsoft Windows and viruses and security flaws and everything else. Generally speaking, Linux and Unix have not had the same level of issues, partly because there's so many more Microsoft-based systems out there. The cyber criminals go for the low-hanging fruit, so they're going to develop their viruses and other attempts focused around the largest pool of available victims, which would be Windows. So whether or not the Linux or Unix system are inherently more robust, for that matter, it applies to Apple iOS as well. It may be that the number of reported instances are lower for those systems just because the cyber criminals are going after the lion's share of the market, which is Windows. But in any case, you'll see some people prefer one version over another. Okay, enough said about that. So you'll hear Apache HTTP server or Microsoft Internet Information Server. Those are used a lot. A lot of businesses use it. As they pointed out here, if you're big enough, like Google, you can write your own. However, the dominant one you will see in the industry is Apache, is really got the lion's share of that. Okay, email. Interesting that the author chooses to talk about this a little bit in this chapter, but go ahead and mention a few issues around email. We all know email and its use. We all participate in it. You know, it was really the primary, in the early days, what drove people to the internet in the first place. I remember when I got my first email address. That was a big deal. And that was long before Netscape introduced the first browser. So at that time, really the primary use of the internet was email and file transfers. We didn't have web-based information like we do today. Drawbacks, I think we've all been sucked into. We spend way too much time each day processing email. Sometimes it's because there's useful information in there, but really a lot of the email that we have to deal with is either unnecessary, we got included on a distribution list we had no business being on, or it's junk mail. So one of the real drawbacks with email is that if you're not careful, you can infect your computer with a virus. So there's a number of really simple tools and tips you can use to avoid that. One is, if you don't know the sender of the email, be suspicious. Although the cyber criminals have found ways to spoof emails, so it looks like an email is coming from your friend or coworker when it really isn't. Look at the subject line. Does it make sense? Would the person that is supposedly sending that email to you, would they write a subject line like that? You know, some clues can be poor grammar, misspelled words, things like that, or just the wording, saying, gee, that's an odd phrase. I doubt that person would ever use that phrase in a subject line. And then, of course, you can apply that to the body of the email, too. If you weren't expecting an email from an individual and the content looks odd or unusual in any way, one thing you never do, never click on a link. Now you can hover over the link depending upon the email software you're using and be able to determine where that link is really taking you. Make sure it makes sense. If you supposedly got an email from Wells Fargo, but the link, the button they've said, you know, click here to update your security preferences, and you find out it's going to some totally different website, not a wellsfargo.com/something something website, you know, don't click on it. When in doubt, contact the sender of the email and say, hey, I just got an odd email from you. I just wanted to confirm that you really sent this email. And sometimes you'll find that it will say, no, I didn't send that. Or they'll say, my email got hacked. Do not click on that link. Or they say, yeah, I sent that. In any case, it's the way things are today. You have to be diligent and be very suspicious. But then we have to deal with spam. Spam is frustrating. It takes time. It fills up our inbox. It's irritating as heck. Back in 2009, when spam peaked, one 24-hour period, 220 billion spam email messages. That's an enormous amount for a single day. Since then, it's kind of leveled off, and we continue to develop better and better technology solutions to block it and prevent it. But the benefits that the spammers get, because sooner, if they send out 100,000 spam emails and they get 10 or 15 people that incorrectly click on it, that can be, tens of thousands of dollars that they're able to steal. And so it's still very attractive to the spammers, to the cyber criminals. Unfortunately, the laws that we have are very difficult to enforce. And so it's really come down to this last bullet here, is that we have to, as individual users, take responsibility for it, because the legal system, law enforcement system, is not going to be able to prevent this from happening. As you can see here, it shows that back in that 2008, 2009 is when spam peaked, and it's fallen off a lot now. And again, that's not because we caught the criminals, it's because they moved on to more productive, quote unquote, uses of their talents. They found better ways to steal money than through spam. So some of the things that you can do, if you have a really long, complex email address, then chances are it won't get auto-generated by a spammer. But you want people to be able to communicate with you. You want businesses to be able to communicate with your business. So you come up with a really complex email address and nobody's going to remember it. And so that doesn't really work. You could, in the, years ago, they were saying don't put your email address on a website, or if you put it on the website, put it in the form of a graphic image, not the actual text. That way the spiders that travel, they go around looking at all the websites, they wouldn't be able to harvest those email addresses. But the problem is your email address is everywhere on the internet. You're not the only person that posts your email address. It's on places that you applied for a job. It's on credit applications. It's everywhere on the web. So that really doesn't help you that much, because it's out there no matter what. For fun, you can do a search on your email address. Do a Google search and see how many hits it comes up with. Multiple email addresses. Now, this is the one that I choose to do. Through Yahoo, and I know some of the other providers have similar things, I have what are called disposable email addresses. I create the email address. If someone emails to it, it gets forwarded to my regular email account, and it shows up in my inbox. But if I start getting too much spam coming in through that email address, I can just throw that email address away and create a new one. Now, the trick there is you don't use a disposable email address with companies that you do business with a lot, or your financial company for, you don't put it in there. It would only be when you're going to sites where you're shopping, or discussion boards or other things where you say, if I have to discard that email address, it's no big deal, because I'm not relying on people getting back in touch with me through that email address. And of course, probably the best way is using software that has filtering techniques built into it to recognize the spam and try and filter it out. I use Norton's anti-spam software as part of my internet security software so that it can flag it and try and keep it out of my inbox. Let's see, anything here? Okay, the concept of blacklist and whitelist. With a blacklist, I'm saying emails coming from this person are spam. Never bother to check it. Just put it in the junk folder or just delete it. It's always bad. And you can do that. You can find some spammers that use the same address over and over and over again. You say, I know that anything coming from that will never, ever be legitimate. Just delete it, get rid of it, don't deal with it. Whitelist is the opposite of that. This is where you say anything that comes from that email address is good. It's someone I want to look at. I know they only send me good stuff. Now, the one downside to that is, as I mentioned earlier, the spammers have figured out how to spoof email addresses, so it may look like it's coming from someone on your whitelist, when in fact it really is not. So the whitelist helps some, but again, it's not that perfect solution. So with the challenge response, it's a form of the whitelist, but it goes a step further. If you're not on the whitelist, I'm not just going to automatically reject you. I'm going to respond back to you and say, hey, I see you're trying to communicate with this person, and to confirm that you're not a computer, generated, please do something. Fill in the blank. Look at the characters that are on the screen and type in what you see. And a lot of times what is used there is called CAPTCHA. And so the reply, the response that has to be generated is something that is designed so that a person can easily do it, but an automated system, which is what the spammers use, cannot recognize it and cannot do it. So for example, you've all seen the CAPTCHAs. You look at that and you see, well, that's 5BVYOHVV3F. Although sometimes the image, the letters are distorted, and I'm looking at it going, I'm not sure what the heck that is. And the problem with CAPTCHA is that people with vision impairment have great difficulty with CAPTCHA. So if you're using this in a business setting, you do have to be careful using CAPTCHA. What I prefer are the ones that involve thinking. It says, fill in the missing word in this sentence. And they'll have a sentence, and then there's a word, a space where a word would be in an underline. It's obvious for a person reading it. You say, oh, that should be for, F-O-U-R. Those kind of things, to me, work better. But in any case, you can do that to then allow, you're in essence authenticating that the person, the entity that initiated that email that was not on your whitelist is not a computer. It's a person. Now, it may still be email that you're not interested in, but at least it's not an automated. So as I mentioned before, one of the things that the spam filters do is they look for indications in the content of the email to determine, is this valid? Words that don't appear to be appropriate for the country that you're in. Grammar issues, misspelled words, certain word pairs. There's things that, the software looks at and says, this looks like, a spam message. It does not look like a legitimate communication. And so you might see that term, the Bayesian statistical techniques. It's really a form of artificial intelligence where the software gradually gets better at how it identifies spam. And I don't question the author's statement there that it's accurate 95% of the time. If that's true, there's a whole bunch of spam out there because I'm still getting a lot of it in my inbox. But in any case. So the United States did try to take a step to reduce this issue, and in 2004, the law went in, and we saw an immediate decrease for a couple of months. But then the spammers picked right back up because they realized there was virtually no possible, chance. There was very little probability they would ever be prosecuted. And while there have been a few done, the problem is that most of the spammers are outside of the US. There's jurisdictional issues, and most of the spammers are located in countries where the officials can easily be bribed, and so they face little, if any, chance of ever being prosecuted. So one of the reasons we have such a challenge with spam is that the internet, when it was developed, no one had the crystal ball to look into it and to imagine that people would do such a thing like spam or other forms of cybercrime. So it was assumed that the person sending the email was really a legitimate person just communicating. There was never any protocol developed or designed that would allow some sort of authentication, verification, a encryption key kind of thing to indicate that this is a legitimate communication. And in particular, this is an interesting part about it that I like what the author said here. A polite set of rules when sending, computer waits for acknowledgement. That was the naivete of the original designers, architects of the internet. They had no idea that people would be so outrageous as to misuse the internet. Let's see. I like this. The ultimate spam solution. I believe this is the way it needs to go. We need to come up with a totally new system and protocol for email. Now, the problem with that is that email is used so widespread in business and everything else. Switching to a different way of doing it is going to be problematic. It's kind of like the same reason the United States has not switched to the metric system. Converting to the metric would be so painful. I don't know if it's ever going to happen. So while this would be great to come up with a new email system, I'm not holding my breath. So again, the most effective solutions are to identify and to block the spammers from your inbox. Now, one thing that is really powerful that we have because of the web servers, information out there, is that they create what's called a web log file that just stores information about a visitor that comes to the website. There's a number of third-party analysis programs that will look at that information and then summarize it and display it to you in a useful manner. These are some of the popular ones that are out there. I think I see most widely used are WebTrends and Google Analytics. I've used Google Analytics a lot, and it is fantastic. You can easily generate reports that show, how did someone get to your site? Did they find you by using a Google search? If they did a Google search, what term did they search on? What pages did they go to in your website? How long did they stay on each page? That can help you to identify, wow, they're really interested in the content on this particular page. Either that or that particular page is so confusing that it took them a long time to figure out what the heck to do next. It's also great in figuring out what's going on when you see if you're selling stuff on the internet. If someone gets all the way to the checkout and then doesn't complete the transaction, it'll show you that. Show you they went through every step and then at the last point they stopped. So then you can look at it and see, why did they stop? Was it buyer's remorse? Is your checkout page difficult to use? You know, what's going on? So the Google Analytics is great. It'll show you, you know, so you can do a change to your website and see before we did the change, this is the average time people spent on our website. Now that we added this new content, they're spending twice as long on our website, things like that. One thing you do need to do is make sure you utilize some of the tools that are out there to check for dead links. If your website is more than a few pages long, you have probably got a lot of links to external sites, other sources, and things go wrong. You make a change, the site that you're referring to makes a change, and now those links don't work. It's nothing more frustrating than for a user to click on a link on your website and get the error message, you know, site not found. So run that periodically. It'll find all the dead links for you and display a list so you can go in and fix it. Now this picture, I included in there because this is a picture of a server room. And the reason for showing this is I want to make my pitch to you. When you set up your e-commerce business, do not set up your own web server to handle your business. Contract with a provider that will host your website on their server. You have more important things to do in getting your business up and going. Pay someone else to host your site. Now, when you become so wildly successful down the road, then you can look at the cost of what you would have to purchase in terms of hardware and software to set up your own server, and if it makes sense, if it would save you enough money. But remember, if you set up your own web server, then you're also having to set up backup. You know, somehow you're going to be backing up to the cloud or to another site. You're going to have someone, you know, an IT personnel, and since e-commerce is 24/7, 365, you're going to have automated software that's monitoring the functioning of your website, and if it goes down, it sends an alert to your IT person to immediately log in or drive in. And do you really want all that? Isn't it worth paying one of the, you know, web hosting companies to have that peace of mind and know that they're taking care of all that for you? So I really question, for most businesses, that it ever makes sense for you to, you know, host your own site just because of that 24/7, 365. Okay, so here's the point in today's talk where we give you the password to unlock the quiz. So the password this time is hypertext. And hypertext is the protocol that's used on the internet. It was developed in the early days as a way of transmitting not just characters, not just text. And that's why the word hyper, that it's text plus graphical information. Like in this case, hypertext is in green. So it says, not only am I sending you the characters, you know, capital H, Y, P, E, R, T, E, X, T, but I'm telling you those should be in green. They should be in bold, and they should be a certain font size and a certain font family. So it allowed the transmission of more than just basic textual characteristics. Okay, cloud computing. This has been really a huge benefit to business. In a lot of cases, there's no reason for us to have our own database system on site. All we need to have on site is a network that allows computers to talk to the internet to go out and talk to our cloud-based service. And again, as I mentioned earlier, One of the advantages of this is that companies providing this have robust backup. They have multiple sites in multiple geographic regions, so an earthquake or a tornado in one area doesn't take you offline because your website is also, available in another server in another part of the country. And so it really has improved the uptime for websites. Another real advantage it gives you is in today's global economy, you can do business anywhere in the world. When you have your company is cloud-based, you don't have to physically be in the office. You can be anywhere and still access everything that you need to do, for the business. So a lot of real advantages to that. The downside, of course, is if your internet connection goes down, you're out of luck. You can't do anything. And of course, we are relying upon these large companies to have robust security protocols in place so that our business information is protected and not vulnerable to being hacked into. Latency is an issue that can be caused when there's too much traffic on the internet. And there are metrics that you can run periodically. I use speedtest.net. Will check my current internet connection. It'll tell me what my download speed is, my upload speed is, and what the latency is on the internet through the particular connection through my ISP that I'm using. So when latency occurs, it's an issue for someone transmitting really large volume of information that needs to be continuous. Most of us, if we transmit a file, if it gets busy in the middle and so it takes a half a second where it doesn't send anything and then it picks back up and finishes the transmission, we don't notice any difference because it gets reassembled at the other end just fine. But when you're streaming video and you lose a half second of video, that's a problem. And that's why all the streaming video systems, they build into the software that's displaying the video a buffer, and it'll buffer a certain amount of time, but if the latency exceeds that buffer that's there, then all of a sudden the picture will drop out. And there you have it. That's chapter 8.